Hi there. Today on Typical Books, it is the How Do You Read book tag. This is from Julie at Planet Julie or Hungry Bookworm, and she graciously tagged me. So thanks so much, Julie, for tagging me and wanting my thoughts on this discussion because I really enjoyed what you've done with this tag. And the questions, there's 4 questions, and they spark some expansion. And I find with a lot of tag videos, once in a while you can answer those tag questions with a yes or no. Haha. And it's up to you to want to expand upon them. But she asked some fairly open questions here about how do you read? How do you read? If you're interested in doing this tag, just go ahead. It is an open tag, so feel free to answer these questions on how you read. Question 1 is, how do you go into reading a book? Do you typically have to be sold a book? Do you read a lot of reviews? Things like that. That was one of the questions that she'd expanded upon, and I found that very interesting. In that some books are very easy, and I find this might apply to many other people. A book is easy. Everyone's talking about true crime, and I wanted to pick up true crime, and I didn't even care what it was about. I liked the cover, and I just picked up that book and wanted to read it. Other books, I might have to, read the back copy, like The Wise Friend. I had to read the back copy of that a couple times before I was like, maybe I'll take a chance on this masterful writer, Ramsey Campbell, who would satisfy any reader without a doubt. Hello. Well, not any reader. I'm sure there are people that are not as big of fans, but hey, I digress. Most books, in a used bookstore have a little provenance. You can tell what is well loved. You can tell what was maybe shunned. There's uncreased collections of 10 of the same paperback book on a shelf. It might not be for everyone because it's obviously being rejected back into the system, right? Where if you happen upon a copy of, say, Animal Farm that's dog-eared and creased and well read and loved and scribbled in and has probably been touched by 1,000 people, you know that that's probably a sure bet. Depending on length too, and that's another thing that weighs heavily into my book decision, where I'm more apt to seek out reviews, ask other people I know if I've known anyone that reads that particular type of book. Is Crime and Punishment for me? It's an investment of time, not like Animal Farm, where I'd love to push Animal Farm on everybody. If you haven't read Animal Farm, read Animal Farm, because you can do that in an afternoon. If you are a slower reader, you can do that in a week easily, and it's going to be enjoyable and entertaining to some degree, guaranteed. So I'd have to say, definitively, it depends on the book. Most often, I like a good cover. I like to read the back jacket copy. I typically don't hop online, but that's maybe my next resort. I don't mind Goodreads reviews, but I'm still sort of picky with those. I tend to read 1-star reviews first because I care more about what the detractors have to say. If they say, oh, it's full of gore and blood and violence, I like, okay, that translates to me as 5 stars. I will check this book out, because what could be a minus to some people is a plus to others. So I do take all reviews with a real grain of salt, especially if there's 400 reviews for a book that was released yesterday. Then I don't tend to take much solace in those good reviews. But we do have a pretty vibrant horror community. If something's worth reading, we definitely hear about it from one another, right? Not only here on BookTube, but elsewhere. So that also has a factor. But really, number one is judging it by its cover, so to speak, and also reading that back jacket copy. Question number 2 feeds into that a little with, do you take a book at its face value? To a certain extent, yes, because I do judge heavily a book by its cover, and more accurately by its back cover. If something looks like horror, then I'm more apt to pick it up. Simple as that. If something looks like Margaret Atwood's Hagseed is another book that I need to read because Margaret Atwood, but I want it to be scary. I want it to be a horror novel. I know it's probably not, but it looks like it from that cover. I may be judging my book by its cover. I just got the proofs in for Night Face, and I like it. It may not do what it's supposed to do from a commercial standpoint. So someone out there is judging that book by its cover. I know it. And, judging this Edward Lee Black Train book by its cover, and I'm going to use this as an example later too. It looks like it could be anything. It could be historical fiction for all I know. The Black Train has a picture of a train. It doesn't tell me anything about it, but it does say some of the most disturbing scenes I've ever read. It may not look like much, but then when I get into it a little bit, just what the book itself is offering, and it tells me about a historic bed and breakfast. And it does talk about this haunted mansion and the ghosts of the past and the plantation surrounding it. So it does have some elements. It's that little thing though, some of the most disturbing scenes I've ever read. If I hadn't taken a chance to read that, this wouldn't be a book I think I'd pick up. The Black Train, what's that about? Who cares? Trains. Then of course you get into some collector versions of things, like Subterranean Press puts out things with nice slip covers and stuff like that, but it doesn't look like much. It could be any book. I have a great H.P. Lovecraft collection upstairs. It's got an interesting spine, but I mean the book itself is just, it's blue paper, right? It's pressboard, whatever. I mean, you can't judge that. You have to go beyond the cover in that way. But I already know what it is, right? So that's a really tough question to answer. But all in all, I do judge a book by its cover. I do take it on its face value. And even deeper than that is trying to give other books a chance and understanding that if something looks like horror, it may not be. I didn't think The Radleys was about vampires until I read that it was about vampires. I thought the cover was trying to look like Cujo. And if I can find pictures of Cujo and the Radleys to see what the similarities are in those particular covers, I really thought one was riffing on the other. They're very, very different books. Sure, I was right in that much. But they do both speak to me, and I enjoyed them both immensely for very different reasons. So, were they correct in having similar covers? Perhaps. Question 3 is, do you read a book as the author intended? I like to think so, in that I try to, and this is something that Julie had gotten into on her video, trying to not psychoanalyze a book. Do you sit with a book and peel back its layers and try and get at what the author really meant? Because sometimes, authors write things with a political or socioeconomic agenda or even a religious agenda that they want you to think about and they want to teach you something. A lot of authors don't. They're simply writing a story that is of interest to them. And I think one of the more famous examples in film is some of the socio-political climate going on when George Romero was filming Night of the Living Dead, and whether they were aware that those statements were being made so loudly and so wonderfully in that film. Were we reading into that, or was it something that was put in intentionally? The verdict is out on that too many times, because some people claim it's impossible that they have written something with such subtext, such important, not even subtext, it's on Front Street, as my co-host Wes would put it. But maybe they didn't mean to do that. Maybe it was just a story about the dead coming back to life. That's all it was, but people are reading into it. And that's a really broad brushstrokes example, right? The Black Train is a very enjoyable, very dark, and very gritty Edward Lee novel that I highly recommend as entry point to Edward Lee, because it's not as insane as some of his Hell cycle. His Infernal City Infernal is very brutal stuff, and a lot of his other stuff is even more brutal. He is a splatterpunk king. This isn't necessarily splatterpunk, although some of the things to do with splatterpunk come from the same sort of thing punk music does, where they're making a statement, a very broad political statement, a very loud political statement sometimes, and that's what splatterpunk does. This has some politics, and problematic politics at that, but I am certainly not reading it with a fine-tooth comb or a gender studies textbook or any other sort of textbook, thank you, to get at the things that are bubbling under the surface here from a political or religious standpoint. And a lot of things that I don't really understand either. I'm an armchair enthusiast when it comes to sociology, by and large, and geography and history at that. I'm no major in any of those things. Who am I to be peeling back layers in a horror fiction novel when it comes to things like geography and history and economics and sociology and psychology. I am none of those things in a master thesis sense. Same with people who get very uptight about weaponry in books, or doctors that get uptight about Robin Cook books, not Cook books, but Robin Cook MD, where I like to think a lot of it's very accurate. People who would watch House MD and get their panties in a bunch, just enjoy a television show. And if you can't, then you need to find something else to relax, perhaps yoga. Then, of course, there is personality types that really enjoy digging down to the nitty-gritty and understanding everything, pulling things apart like puzzles. I enjoy puzzles too, but there's a time and place for that for me. Some personality types really dig that, and that's why they read books, is to drill down and to get all of the meanings that they possibly can, and they read between the lines just because that's how they read. I just don't read like that, that's all. And there is, I think that's okay as long as you're not getting uptight about it or shouting down an author for telling a story you thought had some sort of agenda. Question 4 is, as a reader, reviewer, do you read a book differently, knowing that you're going to review it? And do you read within different genres as a result? Not typically within different genres, although I will spread out to thrillers and just dark, edge-lit. I will read definitely like transgressive literature, classic literature that has been undersung or banned, things like that. I definitely will enjoy reading something that makes me think. So within particular subcultures as well, I used to read a lot of Chris Walter books, which is really kind of just city gritty drama about the punk culture and drunks and junkies, and that's what he wrote about. And I really enjoyed reading Chris Walter books, and that's one of the things about my collection that has been decimated over the years, is my departure of a very large collection of Chris Walter books. But yeah, so that's kind of outside of my wheelhouse really, but that wasn't because of reviewing necessarily, although it first started that way. And there are other books that I pick up because I do write reviews. I ghost write reviews sometimes, and I write reviews for another agency. Very short little reviews, but they're often books that are not horror, they're dark. And I'd like to think that's a service I provide, is that I will read some of the books that other reviewers may not enjoy reading. And in fact, the more I think of it, that has fallen to me a couple times with a dark, gritty, dark sexual BDSM books, and books that have to do with animal abuse or violence against children and things like that. Not that anyone enjoys reading any of those, but there's many people that simply cannot read those things. I'd have to say that luckily I've never been asked to really read romance. And if you want to talk about romance, there's V.C. Andrews romance, because it's very dark, gothic, incestuous, weird, dark? Did I say dark? Literature. In that there is romanticism in there, and there are romantic scenes, and people have romantic partners, but it's not necessarily romance. So yeah, I've never really fallen into a different genre, and I try to not read differently, especially if I'm reading for leisure. If I start to find that I am noticing things that I would note in a review while I'm reading for pleasure, then I typically put the book aside and pick up something else for a little bit. Or I'll power through that section and try and put that editorial brain aside. Even when I'm reading a book for the show, I tend to not really take notes. I don't use sticky flags or tags. If something sticks out at me, it will stick within my head. If I'm enjoying a book, then nuances and character names will naturally be retained. So I don't typically take notes, although maybe I should sometimes. But I try to not read any differently necessarily when I'm doing a review or not doing a review. I will say that I do read a little bit differently being an author, because when I'm reading my own stuff, of course, very critical eye. When I'm reading similar things, sometimes I do fall into comparison mode, or I'm learning from what I'm reading. So I'm making mental notes of how they approached dialogue, how they approached action, where the camera was, so to speak, when they were in the middle of that brawl. That sort of stuff. So I am sort of falling out of recreational reading mode 100% when I do those things. And I try to not, treat every single novel I read as a textbook, although for most writers they really kind of are. So that is really it for How Do You Read, a really fun tag that makes you think about how you approach books. Thank you, Julie, for coming up with that. Everyone check out the original tag on Hungry Bookworm and make sure that you let her know and me if you decide to do this tag. Double thanks to everyone. I just had my 500 subscriber celebration video and the comments are so heartwarming. Thank you so much, everybody, for that, because it was a fun video to make and it's a fun milestone. It's really fun to hear back from everybody too. So thank you all again. Let me know what you're reading in the comments below and make sure that you have an Ookie spooky day.